everyone, and welcome to the first episode in our Community Spotlight series. I had the chance to catch up with a really close friend of mine, Ethan Hicks, who is a fantastic clarinetist, pianist, improviser, and expressive musician. Ethan completed a Bachelor's of Music degree from Central Michigan University, a Master's of Music degree from the University of Oklahoma, and will be beginning their doctoral studies in clarinet performance this fall at Michigan State University. I had a really great time getting to talk to Ethan about their experiences in these music programs and some specific topics of mental health and wellness. All that being said, I want to welcome our first spotlight guest, Ethan Hicks. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I want to say thank you to Ethan for coming on and talking with me today. They're a really close friend of mine. We've had a lot of great, insightful conversations, and I'm excited to share some of the topics we've talked about. So, just kind of launching straight into it. One of the topics that we've talked about recently was the idea of autopilot or depersonalization, and it's a term that's rather unique to everyone's situation and their upbringing. It can look in a lot of different ways. So I think maybe a good place to start would be if you could maybe describe your experiences with it, Ethan, and maybe a concept from your personal experiences of what it looks like to you and where it started, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. I mean, so depersonalization and that autopilot feeling it's a very consistent thing I find, especially with musicians who do long-term schooling, especially after, primary schooling. Um, it it may take longer for a certain musician to get to it than others. For me personally, I know I started going into a music program with that feeling already. Like I remember 3 or so years into the music program at CMU with you, um, someone asked me, like how did you get here? Like what were the steps to get here? And were you super conscious about it and all that? And I couldn't remember applying. I did not remember auditioning. Like the point of getting to my junior year was just completely gone out of my mind. And then one day I just, had this conscious thought of, oh, I'm studying music for a living. I'm in this practice room right now doing this. And then all of a sudden I was more grounded, like in reality.
Mm.
So even just like the getting into the school part was a very autopilot moment for me. But with music as a whole, especially with, COVID and everything, it's really easy for us to fall into those spurts of just I mean, autopilot is the best way to sum it up, really, where you're just going through the motions, you're putting the instrument together, you're practicing and you're doing work, and like it may even sound good, but you're not really consciously there. You're not really feeling like the one who's in control of what's going on.
Mm.
um you might miss parts of like being able to recall what happened. That happens a lot with me, and it's just odd. It comes in episodes where, you're fine for a while. You're really just aware of everything, and then, a week will pass by, and you're like, "Whoa, wait, was I steering the ship when that happened, or how did I,
Right.
how did I get here?" You know?
Yeah, I think a really good point that you were bringing up is that it affects a lot of different parts as a musician. So I mean, there's so many avenues and ways to talk about this, but just specifically with playing itself, I know so many other players and stuff talk about uh, a different term, but kind of related, derealization of in the act of playing something that, and I think a lot of us have had this where you go up on stage and you don't even remember performing on the stage and then you
Yeah.
just kind of walk off. But autopilot and depersonalization, at least for me, and I think kind of what you're describing, it goes a little further than that and affects yourself as a musician outside of the performing. Um so could you maybe walk through your I guess the practicing regimen or the daily life of a music major, how it kind of affected you, relating to other musicians and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I can do my best with that.
Yeah.
So with the practice regimen, I mean, like people will fall into a very specific line of things to do, per day. You might have the long tones, the scales, all that stuff, the huge like 45-minute warm up, whatever. Um, and that's a really easy one for you to just sometimes just go and not be aware that you're doing it. 45 minutes
Absolutely.
pass and you're just done. Um, with going through uh, a bunch of rehearsals with ensembles and things specifically, those are the hardest times I find. If that ever does occur, it doesn't occur as much as with like personal practice, which is nice. But those are the moments when you're trying to make music with other people, and you're really trying to make connections with these people. And sometimes, a whole rehearsal will go by, and you're like, "Was I there? Did I do any of that?" And it can be frustrating because you miss some of that time of like real music making and emoting with other humans, and uh, it can be really stressful. So um, when it comes to large ensemble things, or even just like small ensemble things, that's the most frustrating time I've ever had to go through that kind of thing. Luckily, it doesn't happen often. But I've actually very much been where you were talking about, with like you go on stage and all of a sudden you walk off stage and you're like, did I play? Like that definitely would happen to me anytime I performed on any of the honors recitals at CMU. Like, because I was so nervous about all of the faculty and people being there instead of just our specific studios, that that anxiety would kind of just take over. And then it's like, okay, someone else is going to go play on stage. Then I will sit this one back in my subconscious, and when I'm done, I'll come back out. It's a
Right.
really weird feeling for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I wanted to ask about and talk about was we can only theorize like where something like this comes from, and it's like, and it's only, I mean, it's so many parts, and this definitely isn't straight like medical advice. This is just, anecdotal personal experiences. But I know, speaking for myself, and I'll ask like if you've had this, I think a lot of this autopilot and depersonalizing can come from something I've written about a little bit in the musician's handbook, is mirroring and reflecting of behaviors near you. And so what I mean with that is like when you're going down this track of being a music major, and we'll say specifically for both of us being music performance majors, there's certain things you do, and uh, prepping for recitals, and then eventually your junior senior year preparing a CV and getting ready for applications and stuff. And I think it's really really easy to fall into an autopilot mode of being, just kind of following everyone else's and those in the years ahead of you of what they did. And that can be great to have examples and mentors, is what I'm talking about, of what they've done. But it's this weird thing where you kind of just like sly into exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're really pushing out something that definitely happens like everywhere. Not even just like musicians, but of course this means more to us because we're in it. I just constantly, even in my own life too, have seen it where people do exactly that, where there's a lot of mimicking going on, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not a bad kind of thing. You're not trying to erase your sense of self or anything by copying other people when it comes to like career paths and that kind of stuff. I mean, we go through performance programs very often where people say like the only job is to go and teach college, and maybe you can perform some while you do that. But like when you have an ed degree, you're going to go teach whatever layer of school, maybe teach in college if you want. If you don't, then you're going to go teach in college or go perform. And then there's all kinds of other things we could do, but they never talk about them. So you find a bunch of people going through performance routes that say, okay, I have to have the CV completed by this time. I have to be doing this. Like you said, I have to go to graduate school. Like a lot of have tos. And then because of that, with how interconnected we are in the schools of music, we find someone a grade above us who probably just went through that same path. And you say, hey man, how did you do that? Hey, can I take a look at your CV and see how you structured it? What kind of people did you use for your references? You do all of that so you can, get a job one day and be secure in that. And like that goal of I really want to make sure that I'm secure and all that later on down the line can really really affect how individually you go at that process, you know. You end up copying people because there's a right way to do things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I
That's at
mean,
least how I take it.
it gives great like foundational like uh resources and skills and like making a CV and then like just I mean just playing wise like going through the standard rep that every instrument does. Like if you play
Hmm.
clarinet, you're going to play Mozart and you're going to audition
Oh.
everywhere with it. Um
You're gonna play it 80 times.
yeah, but I think the general idea, I think a lot of professors do a really good job generally of communicating this is what you got to go through, and once you get these skills, you can diverge after that. But I think
Yeah.
maybe it's like us as students, it's just a tough issue to tackle, but I think maybe it's more on us as students to model the behavior after gaining those skills, that it's okay to diverge and go on your own path and play different rep. Because I just know the studios I've been a part of and the musicians I've been around, like there's definitely a fear of going down other paths, and like you said, that's everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it's a constant thing. And you know, I've witnessed a lot of people who, when they try to break out of that shell of getting out of like specific rep and stuff and just trying to do something new or even just something that people there haven't played, um, they kind of get lost,
hmm,
you know. It can be a really frustrating thing. Like I have had that happen as well, where you just kind of stop and you're like, okay, but I want to do something different, but what do I do? Like, how do I do it? You know, even if it's a piece that you heard was like, oh, this is a good piece. I should take a look at this one. No one's ever played this where I've been. Um, then you start to think like, well, what are they going to think about it? You know, how are they going to take the piece? Is this going to be a good thing for me to do? And then all of a sudden you're really afraid to just, you know, go into a new piece of music, which is so weird that for something so like it's so specific like that. It just I find that really mind-numbingly weird sometimes
yeah,
how much we get stuck in those ruts.
that's kind of the center of it. It's not just the pieces. It's like how like there is a way to play the Mozart as
Yeah, it's
clarinet,
the
and
perception. It's
yeah, and
go
like
ahead.
and there's a way to play that, and then there's a way like for saxophone, there is a way that you approach the Albright Sonata, and like there's
Yeah.
this recording and like sound like Tim McAllister, and like there and you gain so many skills from mimicking it, but it's as a musician you kind of maybe it's a bit far out there, but for myself I know it's like you kind of lose a bit of yourself and your
Yeah.
expression as a creator.
As a technician, you gain a lot.
Yes, yeah.
As a technician, you gain a lot. But as a musician or like an emotive musician at that, you know, you lose some of the genuineness behind why you perform, you know? Especially with when you bring up the Mozart, even like I know it's a meme, I know it's a joke for like all the music studios because everybody knows that piece. There's a reason everybody knows it. It's just so commonly performed, and it's always performed the same way. Even with people who are super famous like Martin Frost, they have these huge recordings come out. Everybody listens to them. They mimic all the grace notes that are added in. They all the articulations that are changed. You know, it comes down to still sounding really cool because technically it's really well done and it's very proficient. But you're not emoting it the same way that he was when he made the dang thing. You know, and it's frustrating to watch everybody want to mimic like that, and you do become depersonalized. We all just become like a bit of the machine, you know. You were part of the clarinet machine when you play the Mozart concerto, and I don't want to do that. I want to perform a piece of music and be me while doing it, you know.
Yeah,
Oh,
you used a really good term, technician. I think that's a perfect way to describe it as players. And I think that, I guess, is where I see maybe a future as colleagues at universities where we can try to support more when we see it, at least from my perspective, it feels like a lot of the time we we of course should value technical ability and technical skill, but I found myself going into that mindset and still do all the time where I go to a recital or I'm listening to an album and I'm listening for just like technical aspects of how they are playing the instrument and
yep.
like, you know, did they get all the double tonguing? Did it sound clean in the start of the Albright?
I mean, even
You know,
simpler than that, you hear a wrong note and you go, "Oh, that person played badly."
Right.
somewhere in your subconscious. You may not consciously be like, oh, no, obviously that person is like, they're my friend and they're playing really, really well. But the moment you hear a wrong note, you're like, oh, I'm so sorry. That just ruined the performance. It's such a, beaten into us thing at this point. And it's really hard to break that mindset without having tons and tons of faculty members at these universities or even just high school teachers who are helping to drive that home early on.
Yeah, because we've all had experiences, and part of the reason why we go to music school in the beginning of listening to a piece and we get butterflies and we have a feeling from it, and that feeling is different for every single person, but it definitely kind of gets. I know for me, it kind of gets lost by going through this technical process, and I know I can do certain things that I wasn't able to when I started at CMU. Uh, but it's almost like you're listening. Uh, you got like a debuff or something. Like it went, it regressed, and like you said, it's like something you kind of have to actively be aware of and like pay
Yeah.
attention to. Yeah.
There's never going to be anything wrong with trying to push for technicality and proficiency on an instrument, but the fact that we have to have it separated so often from musicality, that's what hurts. I was very lucky to study with who I did down at University of Oklahoma,
Mm.
because there were times I would say these worries, and she would say, "Okay, well, let's look at a more musical way of solving the problem." Instead of just saying you need more air here, you need this or whatever. Let's give a reason for that through some sort of emotion. Why does this line have to go where it does? What are you feeling, and can you sell that idea, and can you use that idea to also help the technicality parts? Sometimes if you think of like you're falling down a hill, that's your emotive thing. Well, all of a sudden then your scales are very rocky. They're not very steady. But if you have something a little bit more grounded, maybe all of a sudden your fingers relax a little bit more, and like you can use those things to help technicality, but also you're not losing musicianship. And that wasn't a very hard thing to latch onto when I was there. I don't know if it's probably just because I was in graduate school and I've been doing this for a while, but um, it just got me thinking how little I've seen professors do that, especially all the way throughout their studios. They might have a student or two where they're like, oh, this works really well, but it's not a very common teaching style from anything that I've seen. And that's odd to me.
Yeah, I've had a few. I've been fortunate to have a few teachers kind of teach in that way that you're talking about through musical example rather than just here's a bunch of double tonguing exercises, here's a bunch of voicing exercises with no musical
Yeah.
context. Um, but did you find that for yourself? It might be a simple question, but like you probably, I'm guessing that you probably found yourself wanting to go to the practice room more during that time period rather than
Absolutely.
before. Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. The moment you give me a finger food book and you say go over there and practice all your left hand, right hand fingerings back and forth in
Right.
whack ways without having like a piece to put that into, it's like, okay, I'll go do it, but I'll take my like 10-minute break every 2 minutes because I just can't keep. And like that's a me thing too with ADHD. I struggle to have the focus sometimes if I don't have a really good like reason in my heart of why I'm doing it. If it's just, hey, go in there, do the busy work, it's like, oh, okay, I can do it for a little bit, but how long can I really get good practice out of that?
Hmm. So, one specific question I wanted to ask you about your experience was with this feeling of autopilot and depersonalization in regards to graduate school and applying for that in that time period. Um, what were your specific feelings, I guess, that senior year going into that and seeing everyone before you doing it a certain way? And I feel like everyone's graduate application process and preparing is really unique, but I was just kind of wondering your experience.
Yeah, it turned out to be a bit of more of an active process, thankfully, than, high school getting into undergrad. Like I was aware of the choices I was making more, but especially with having to travel to different states and flying for the first time, and this was all going to happen in the same couple weekends and seasons and stuff. Uh, it was a lot to take in, The process in general of like being there and doing the auditions weren't that bad. Like that was actually kind of an enjoyable experience for me. But they still went by really, really fast, you know, and you get done and you do wonder like, did I just do that audition? Like, how did it go? I can't even remember. So there was a little bit of autopilot stuff in there. The process of actually, you know, putting together the applications and the pre-screenings and all that stuff, that was a bit more active for me, thankfully. Um, I did have a couple like references to go off of from people that I had met above me who had just gone through the same process. But I feel like with getting into the master's level, I didn't really do as much comparing. You know, I just kind of would take a quick gloss over materials and things and say, well, yeah, I'm on the same track and I'm going to do it this way. And that's the one time I wasn't super on autopilot. Just getting into a DMA program just now, that was where a little bit more of that came in because this was like, okay, it's crunch time and I've been off from school for a year. I really got to make sure that my stuff is in order and, you know, sell myself really well. And that I found was a lot more autopilot in terms of, um, you know, referring to other people's stuff and trying to do a lot of more comparison and that kind of thing. So much so that the month of like November and December both just were just gone. You know, preparing for the pre-screenings and getting applications done, just they vanished in the blink of an eye. February kind of did disappear too when I did the actual audition, but it's just a lot when you have all those applications you got to do and all those auditions. Thankfully, I didn't have to go anywhere this time, but it sits on your mind in such a weird way that if you let it, you can just like lose so much time. It goes away. The stuff gets done, which is good, but like how much did I actively participate in that? I wonder. It couldn't have been that much.
Yeah,
That I find odd.
it kind of just takes all of your brain power and your mode of being during that time period. Did you did you feel a certain pressure or like from either like teachers or just yes pressure
Yeah.
for that whole like applying period, but specifically did you feel any pressure towards applying to certain schools from like students before or like teachers, and did that kind of feel like an autopilot process?
I feel like the ones that had the most pressure were the ones I had the least autopilot on,
Hmm.
that might be a weird thing. That might be different. Those schools that I auditioned at that I knew people in the programs and I had seen them before, um, those were the ones I would freak out more for. You know, where those were the ones that I was probably more going to be okay if I auditioned and like getting into the program there was better because I already knew the professors a little bit through these people and like that should have been easier to do. Those were the ones that I would freak out more and um, try to stay really actively aware of what was going on, but things would just, you know, disappear and subconscious would take over. When I would go to like I auditioned at Rice
Mm.
Shepherd School of Music for my master's. When I went down there, that should have probably been the most terrifying audition I had, and it was a scary thing for sure. But I was completely grounded in every decision I made the whole way through, and that's one of the few times that I've ever had that where like I was absolutely certain in every step along the way, like this is the decision I'm making, and this is why I'm doing it. You
Okay.
know, so I kind of feel like that's backwards for most people, though. You know, when you're relaxed about something, you probably aren't going to be as on autopilot, maybe.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it's a different kind of autopilot if it does occur.
Yeah, I think maybe just uh depending on the situation, kind of like back when we were talking about like performing and stuff, when a really stressful situation arises where you derealize out of that like stressful situation, could like be separated in that way. I just thought, I kind of going backwards a little bit, I wanted to ask about, I know this was an experience for myself and I was wondering if you had it too, where the whole applying process and going to graduate school, you freshman, sophomore, junior year, you know it's in the future, you know it's gonna happen eventually, but it just kind of like hits you square in the face as soon as you get to senior year. And I know for myself that was definitely a depersonalizing experience, going through that of like how did I get here? Did
Yeah.
you kind of have that too? Or
Yeah, I mean, it did kind of hit like a truck, didn't it?
yeah,
You just get to a point where you're like, oh shoot, I gotta do all this stuff now. And I guess for me, it was different in the sense that I didn't know that graduate school was pretty much like a thing that you should do if you have performance degrees. I mean, like, you don't have to do that, of course, but people very much push that. And like I didn't have that because I didn't even have any knowledge about what undergrad was like till I got there. You know, I came from a town without any lessons and everything, so I just was not prepared for what music was going to be like professionally. So when I did get to senior year, it was like, wait, or great, there's even more reasons I'm unprepared. I need to just buckle down and figure out how everyone else did it. And it's kind of hard, I think, doing the audition process anywhere to not kind of just feel like another cog in the machine, if
mm,
that makes sense.
yeah,
Like you just kind of start to feel like, okay, I'm just another number, and they'll judge it. They'll hopefully judge everybody the same exact way. But like even knowing that they're gonna have standards that they're judging everybody across the board is like, am I really a person going in there? You know, or am I just another incoming student possibly? Or it's hard not to feel bogged down by that, and I don't think that helps the depersonalization part. You know, because the moment you feel like you're not really an individual doing these processes anymore, the harder it is to really feel comfortable in auditioning and being your authentic, like performing self. Um, that's at least how I take it.
yeah. Uh, I'd say I think that I think professors that end up, and this isn't a bad or good thing, but usually professors that end up being really good at recruiting are really good at making their students not feel like that cog in a machine, I guess. What you're kind of describing.
Yeah.
Um, but and so I don't know if that was your experiences with like CMU and like Oklahoma, if both your professors kind of was that kind of the thing where it made it they made you feel they were identifying your specific needs and like your questions.
Um, that was my experience with specifically University of Oklahoma. With Dr. Turk, it was very nice because from the get-go, you know, they knew I had embouchure issues. They knew
Mm-hmm.
I had things I wanted to work on, but they also knew I was super emotive and really just needing to help with like the tools to allow me to emote to my fullest extent. You know, so they knew very specific things about me from very little bits of my playing, and they told me right off the bat, like, is this correct? And I would say yes, it is. And they were the only professor out of all the places that I had auditioned that took the time to do that and sit down with me and make me feel like I am, you know, an individual human being. With Dr. White, he did fantastic work when I was with him, but I mean, I didn't again know what I was gonna do going into the school. I didn't know what music school was gonna be like, so I had no questions for him. There wasn't a whole lot of talking once the audition process was done. He's got like a ton of students he had to get through, and um, I guess in that position, it was really easy for me to feel like I was on autopilot and not like a human being until I, was there and working with him long term, and then we sort of got to know each other, and things went better. But like, I don't blame him for that. That's you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
graduate school versus undergraduate school. You know, you come in a way more generalized musician coming into undergrad than you do with graduate school, where a little bit more tunnel visioned of like, this is where I want to go. Tunnel vision's a bad word to explain it, or bad phrase, but you know what I mean. You're
Yeah.
more whatever streamlined towards what you want to
Specialized. Yeah.
do, specialized. Yeah. So like, it's not always the professor's fault necessarily. I think it would be hard to make every single person who auditions coming in feel, that like you have that personal relationship right off the bat, because sometimes it just doesn't click with students too. I know that. But I do have the lucky experience that with my last degree and studying under Dr. Turk, that right off the bat, before I was even there, I was sure that I was going to have a personal enough connection with her that things would work better than if I went anywhere else. And I actually did pass up a couple scholarship opportunities and fellowship things just to make sure that I could work with her. So that's gonna probably stay with me for the rest of my life mentally. But I don't mind. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think I mean, like you said, it's a difference between graduate studies and undergraduate studies. Absolutely. I think kind of a conclusion of sorts to like this idea of autopilot and where we can kind of move forward is that there's for me, I see like three layers of the professor, absolutely, is in direct relation to the student, but the layer I want to like put more emphasis on is how we interact with each other and colleagues, and I think studio environment, and then even broadly school of music environment is even more important, and just a little action such as I'm trying to think of an example, someone playing a new piece you've never like heard before in the studio in a practice room, and you go comment on it and you talk about like how cool it is and sounding, and like maybe you thought that in your head, but because it's so different you just like didn't even approach them basically,
Yeah.
and like didn't even mention it. Little things like that really, I think, push forward positive environments where we can kind of start moving away from this autopilot depersonalization mode of being that a lot of people have in music school.
Yeah. I mean, think of the last time someone's knocked on your practice room door to say, dude, what is that piece? I've never heard that before. That's awesome. It
Yeah.
sounds really cool. And
Yeah.
just that, nothing else of coming in. Like, no one's going to come into your room and be like, dude, you sounded really sharp on that note over there. I don't know what this piece is, but fix that. Like, no one's going to do that. But, like, I think if we had better, like you said, with the whole school of music, better relationships with each other throughout studios where anybody can come in and just be like, dude, that sounds really good, or that's really cool. That kind of thing, would be better. We are very much in our segmented studios, though, where people are kind of afraid to branch out. Maybe socially they'll do it, but when it comes to music stuff, everybody tries to stay in their own wheelhouse
Stay in
and
your
that
lane
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, no, I'm not saying for anyone to go into places and critique anyone, of course. But just the idea of grounding yourself in the thought of, wow, music is cool and we're doing some cool stuff. I'm hearing cool sounds. Like, you should be celebrating that with each other a whole lot more than we do now, I think. And that would, in my opinion, help a lot with that idea of not just being another cog in the machine. People hearing you and being like, yeah, hey, you're a musician. I'm a musician. That's pretty cool that we do that, that kind of
For sure.
thing
Absolutely.
would be. And that seems like really simple. That might be oversimplified, but I mean, why can't it not be that simple,
Thank you all so much for tuning in to listen, and I hope some of this discussion in the spotlight was educational or useful. Ethan runs some great live streams with a great community regularly on twitch.tv, both music and video game streams. There's a link to their Twitch channel in the description, and I'd highly suggest checking it out. Ethan and I had some more conversations on some other health and wellness topics that will be released in the next couple weeks. Thanks again for listening, everyone, and take care.